Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from rainy Seattle. Did I say Seattle? I meant Southern California. You can't tell the difference anymore. We get pounded every day. Having said that, I want to welcome back my friend from the northern part of the state who has been getting a lot of rain and snow. Drew, welcome back to the show. Are you getting the same stuff up there that we're getting down here?
Yeah, as much as we talk about how wonderful and big and diverse this state is, it seems to be all the same weather up and down. Yeah, it's raining right now.
I'm sure people across the rest of the country are crying for us today, Drew. But anyhow, let's get off that for a minute. It does have some political impact, but we'll get into that later. Listen, the big headline coming out of the day today started yesterday. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are meeting in Moscow. Drew, this is a strategic meeting. China clearly is the big brother. Russia's the little brother here. How do you make this given the fact that the International Criminal Court recently issued a warrant for Putin's arrest on war crimes?
Look, I think that if you want to go back to the beginning of this invasion, if you want to look at all the actions of the Biden administration, they've all been pretty much useless. I think that it's really serious. Obviously, there's a lot of things in the news apart from this, but this is a big blow to NATO. This is a big blow to the Biden administration. I think this represents really a change in the tide here, and it's not to the benefit of Western Ukraine that wants to be apart from Moscow. This is really a significant development, and China's coming out and basically throwing it in people's faces and saying, "Hey." Look, you had Putin, who's supposed to be dying from cancer. He's walking around. He looks healthier than Joe Biden in occupied territory. You've got the meeting with Xi. They've got, and I mean, look, the globalists are very pleased, I think, because the realignment of the global stage is happening right now at this very moment. New alliances are being formed. And I think that a combination of naivete, ignorance, and also a bunch of malefactors have led us to this point.
Well, one of the things that's been happening just on an economic point of view, China used to buy most of its oil from the Saudis. Now it's not. It's buying the majority of its oil from the Russians. My guess is, Drew, that Xi is extracting a price from Putin for some of this support. My guess is they're buying Russian oil at discounted prices. It's good for Russia. It helps them fuel their economy and their war machine. It's good for China. China has a readily available source of oil. And despite all the green knuckleheads in this country that want to shut down every oil refinery we have, the Chinese and the Russians couldn't give two you-know-what about global warming. They may give lip service to it, but at the end of the day, they know that the world runs on oil, and now China has a readily available source. This peace plan that China put forward, it certainly benefits Russia. It gives Russia a big chunk of Ukraine. Ukrainians obviously are not going to go for that. Where do we go from here with this? I mean, there's rumblings that she wants to have a meeting with Zelensky. And it almost seems to me like where the United States used to be a major role as like the power broker of the world, China's really taking center stage on that now.
Yeah, they are, and the Biden administration has allowed this to take place. I would point out, and we'll get into what you just stated there more. But if you remember, even after Putin invaded Ukraine, the U.S. was involved in negotiating a nuclear deal, right, more or less, with Iran.
Right.
Only we weren't negotiating it. We were using the Russians as our intermediaries. That never made sense to me at all. I mean, Russia's the big bad guy. Putin's the worst person on the planet. We got to get Putin. We got to protect Ukraine. And yet, even after he invaded, that continued to persist. And there's been very little reporting about that. But did it ever make sense to anyone why, even before an invasion, Russia was never considered an ally, not since the Cold War, certainly. And here we are using Russia, the alleged avowed enemy of the United States and the West, using them to broker a deal that would have impact on our allies and ourselves. It never made sense. And so we have given up a lot of our ability, a lot of our power, even the way it's been received around the world, the projection of it, the image of it, even with that. And so, I mean, here we are. I mean, I've never in my life, Mark, felt like until recently that I was living in a country that was on the decline, right? I never sensed, even though we had financial problems and so on and so forth, it was never my sentiment that, okay, well, America could be supplanted, right? People talk about China trying to do it, but now I'm looking at it and I'm saying, look, I mean, it seems like we are really on the cusp of being supplanted.
Yeah, I can agree with what you just said. Craig Shirley used to write for was one of Ronald Reagan's author speechwriters. He did a column the other day, and he talked about the fact that don't kid yourself. In this Biden administration that we're living through, virtually everything the man touches turns to stone. I mean, I could go back on the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, the slow response to what happened in Ukraine, what caused the Russian invasion in the first place. You can debate it, but ultimately the embrace of Ukraine into NATO obviously had some effect on it. That's not to excuse Russia for what it did, but the fact is, I can just think in my mind under Donald Trump, George Bush, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, the Russians would never have even thought about going into Ukraine if there was a Republican president. And maybe I'm throwing shade on Joe Biden, but it does seem that virtually everything on the international stage does not go the right way. And then we plug into news about what's happening here. Spring offensive going on in Ukraine, the European Union supplying ammunition, 1 million rounds of mortars, bullets, tanks. If we hear now that the U.S., which was going to take 2 to 3 years to get tanks to Ukraine, 2 to 3 years, if it goes on that long, Ukraine won't be a country anymore. Now we're going to refurbish Abrams tanks and get them there sooner. I mean, it almost seems like we're always, what was it saying, leading from behind? And there is a degree of frustration that I think among our allies about the actions that we're taking. And China is clearly exploiting this indecision and this weakness.
Look, I just think the reality is that we're all getting played. I think that yes, this is a proxy war. The issue is we can sit here and how can we not have sympathy for what's happening to innocent Ukrainian civilians? You
Sure.
can't say that what Putin did was right? No. I mean, morally, it is black and white in that sense. But the problem is other power brokers are using this and understand that it's very hard to say, no, we need to get out of here for their own ulterior motives. That's what's going on here. And I think you can't have a discussion about really, and we don't know all, I mean, we can sit here and we can't make sense of what's going on. You're talking about it's reactionary, we're not leading. I mean, these are all true, but why? Why didn't the sanctions work? What were the sanctions really at the end? Those were supposed to be effective. They weren't. And I look, we have an investigation going on. We have receipts, literally bank account records of over $1 million in payments from the communist Chinese going to members of the Biden family. And people have been ringing the alarm bell about this for a long time. China's done it in other countries around the world. We're not the first, but it's bribery. It's bribery. And the reality is so many of our politicians have been bribed by the communist Chinese. And what's so sad about it is that really the sin itself of taking money from the communist Chinese, the admission of that, if you just say, okay, I screwed up, I'm in deep, I made a mistake, that in the aggregate is not worse than what they've done because of the bribery. And I just think that you have to understand that China's is benefiting from everything, even from this Russia-Ukraine conflict. Who comes out ahead of this regardless? Okay, we're involved, we're throwing in our money, we're sending tanks, whatever it is. But it's in China's best interest to have a long, protracted war because they can wear us down. They can have our resources poured into this. And then people predict that 2025 is the year now, if not before, that China's we know that they want Taiwan. And so I just look at this And the people that are backing this, a lot of our politicians, they don't have America's best interest. You know, that's the difference. You and I sit here and talk about Russia, Ukraine, and what the outcome should be and what's right. But they play off of that, and that's not really what they're up to.
Right, right. No, there's no question. And now that you've got really the focal point of the Chinese and the Russians, I mean, that's not good for America. And when you play out, again, I'm not trying to play military games on the show here, but over a long extended period of time, common sense would tell you a small country like Ukraine, you're not going to be able to withstand the Russians forever. There's more, they just have more of everything, bigger, more sophisticated. Now the Ukrainians, are inflicting huge casualties on the Russians. Putin, he could care less. I mean, in his mind, I think he views it as a longer term play. The longer this thing strings itself out, maybe the less involved the U.S. becomes. And ultimately, I think he's going to have to be forced to realize that the losses will become so horrific. That's the only way I think the Ukrainians can get out of this mess. Otherwise, I don't sense that the territory he's taken right now is going to be enough to cause him to get to the table unless the Chinese pull a rabbit out of the hat. So to me, this is not a good thing happening. But again, given the leadership that we have in Washington, I'm not really sure where we can go from here at this point.
No, and I just think that people need to be more realistic about what's going on. People ignore the history of Ukraine and Russia as well. I mean, really what this boils down to is you do have Eastern Ukraine, which has a pro-Moscow sentiment. And, look, Ukraine was part of Russia for a very long time, okay? And so, we've been meddling in Ukraine's affairs for a long time as well. I mean, we have been backing. I mean, this is the thing. Ukraine's not a democracy, and they're not a democracy because America's meddled there too. And the pull is Russia wants Ukraine, and the U.S. and Europe wants to keep it away from Moscow. And so really it's this ticking time bomb that has erupted. And we live in this modern age where we forget history and so on and so forth. People got upset with Ron DeSantis for calling it a territorial dispute. It is a territorial dispute. I mean, I was saying to people, do you know how we acquired, a third of this country? Do you know how we got like Texas and most of the southwest of this country? Well, we went to war with Mexico and we won the war and we took the territory. I mean, I understand that we feel like we're more civil today and these things aren't supposed to happen, but this is a small blip on the radar screen in terms of all of mankind's history. So these things do happen. And I just think that the response has been very ignorant to all of this. And, what were we thinking to begin with? I mean, Russia, we've always known, has a superior military. It doesn't matter what their economy is and so on and so forth. Compared to Ukraine, I mean, it's like the U.S. versus Mexico. It really is that big. And like you said, he'll lose people all day long. He doesn't care. He's on his conquest or whatever it is, whatever his justification may be. But Ukraine was never going to win this war against Russia unless what? We're going to put boots on the ground and help them. I mean, we can give them money. We can give them tanks all day long, but it's a manpower issue as well. And what? We're going to give them the fighter jets, but yet they don't know how to fly them. So who's going to teach them how to fly them?
Well, their pilots are in this country training as we speak. So
yes.
Yeah. So that's happening. And Poland is sending planes with pilots to help Ukraine. So look, without NATO, the EU, the United States, this thing would have been over a long time ago, but it hasn't. It's going to continue to drag on. And we'll see we're going to see pretty soon, I think, Drew, within the next 60, 90 days, if this Putin-Xi meeting is really what type of effect it's going to have on the war. Anyhow, we can speculate on that all day long. I do want to shift subjects here away from Ukraine for a minute, Putin and Xi, and talk about what I know you've been talking about your show a lot, what I think is just banana republic type stuff, and that's the potential Trump indictment. I mean, for God's sake, even if he did it, Drew, it's a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor. We don't charge former presidents in this country. And, you brought up about the fact millions of dollars have gone to the Biden family, and they're trying to understand now if that money follow the money, made it into Joe Biden. You and I know it did. But how in the world can you take things seriously when a Democrat Manhattan district attorney that ran for election on the fact he was going to try to get Trump indicted on a misdemeanor charge, something that happened 7 years ago? I mean, who in the hell cares whether, first of all, it's not illegal to pay hush money. Second of all, Trump Organization's a private company. It's not a publicly traded company. What is the basis upon this other than, and literally, as Trump says, a political hit job and a political witch hunt?
Well, they are creating crimes and creating laws that don't exist. That's what's happening here. Firstly, you made the most important point, and I like it the most because we can entertain and we will talk about it. But at the end of the day, Trump didn't even commit a crime. This was not a campaign finance violation, period. Okay, so that's the fact. But let's just go with the left and say, oh my gosh, Trump did what you accused him of doing. What is it that they're accusing Trump of doing? Well, let's go back to 2016 with Hillary Clinton. The Clinton campaign paid for the now infamous Steele dossier, right? And they used the Perkins Coie law firm to pay Fusion GPS to do it. Now, that was opposition research, okay? Well, how did they delineate that on their forms? They said it was legal services rendered.
Right. Exactly.
That is exactly what they're claiming that Trump is guilty of. She paid, I think, $113,000 fine, and it went away. Now, let's continue. The hush money. You can go back to 2008. You had John Edwards, who was the running mate of John Kerry, right? At one point. And John Edwards, this happened in 2011, a few years later, but John Edwards, actually, two people gave him $1 million. One of the women was 100 years old. They gave him $1 million to pay hush money to a woman that he had a baby with that wasn't his wife, to make her comfortable and so on and so forth. Now, he was indicted by a grand jury, but then when it finally went to court, he was rendered not guilty on that charge, and it was a hung jury on the other charges. So there's even precedent for this type of thing. But the left doesn't care, because you have to understand their entire strategy going into 2024 is just to label Trump a criminal, right? So they say he's twice impeached. It's historic. Well, impeachment's not guilt. He was exonerated twice. Right. So in their minds, they can tell the American people he's the first American president that was indicted. Well, an indictment, you can indict a ham sandwich. That's the saying in a grand jury setting, because there's no defense. It's just 22 liberal people from Manhattan in a classroom setting with a bunch of prosecutors who are telling them, I hate Trump, you hate Trump, right? Well, this is what we're going to get him on. And that's all it is. They bring in Michael Cohen, who's disgraced. And here's the other thing that's really important that people don't remember or know. Michael Cohen didn't go to jail because of a campaign finance violation. Michael Cohen invested heavily in taxi medallions. And he found himself something like $22 million in debt, more or less, the way his finances came out in the end, because, of course, Uber and Lyft basically rendered those taxi medallions, worthless, kind of like what's going on at the banks right now. Anyway, so Michael Cohen committed tax fraud, not related to Trump, with his own personal financial business affairs. And then he admitted to committing a crime that he didn't commit to get a plea deal, to get a lesser sentence. So that's how they got him to admit that there was a campaign finance violation. And as a matter of fact, Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani's people, tried to help Cohen in this. They sent in Bob Costello, who was the surprise witness that just, testified in front of the grand jury. And it was a rift. So Cohen has an axe to grind with Trump. He probably wanted to be, what's the word? To get a
government job working for Trump.
Job, and he wanted to get a pardon or something like that.
Pardon.
Right?
Yeah, he did want a pardon. Right.
Yeah, but he went and tried. He turned on Trump, and Trump didn't do anything wrong. But so that's what's going on here. I mean, this is ludicrous.
Very ludicrous. I concur with you, Drew. And again, I go back to my central point here. Who cares? This is 7 years ago. We've already had an election Trump won, an election Trump lost. Do you think that, other than hardcore leftists, most people don't give a rip about this? I mean, it is a misdemeanor, for goodness sakes. And to drag this country through this. I think it's a distraction. I think with all the issues going on in the country right now, the problems in Ukraine, inflation. Now we got some issues with banks, the economic news, possibly heading into recession. All the information on Hunter Biden, on Joe Biden, the Chinese connection. To me, it almost seems like, well, maybe we can get a distraction here with Trump. Honest to goodness, if I'm Joe Biden, looking ahead and not short-sightedness, Drew, my opinion is if they indict him on a misdemeanor like this, first of all, I don't ever think he's going to be convicted. Second of all, I think he's going to be strengthened politically. Now, nobody wants to get indicted, but my goodness, there may not be people out in the streets, but I'm going to tell you one thing, that hardcore base of Republicans that Trump has, they are not going to go away from him. And if anything, Trump polling numbers are likely to go up. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's 100% accurate. I think it was Chris Rock or something that was captured behind closed doors saying the same thing. Are you guys crazy? Are you guys crazy for doing this? You're just going to make him more popular. He made the comparison of Tupac Shakur. If you're going to do this to Tupac, he's going to sell more records, So it's the same kind of situation here. Look, we saw this type of support emerge for Trump after the Mar-a-Lago raid. Nobody wants to see this. And I just think that the left is so unhinged that there are a lot of reasons they're doing this. Some, of course, does have to do with 2024 and what their campaign's going to be based on, which is simply that Biden's not Trump. That's kind of what it comes down to, if that's how it shakes out. But really, it's just hatred. They're so arrogant and they're so upset that they couldn't Watergate him in 2016, 2017, 2018. That's what they wanted. And it's kind of interesting because the same thing that people, even that are right-leaning, would criticize about Trump in terms of his personality and so on and so forth. Well, that's the same personality that got him elected in the first place. Because when they think about what they did with that October surprise, right? It was the Access Hollywood tape, grab him by the,
right.
And what he proved was that these types of weapons, these bullets that are fired at conservatives, Republicans, well, the reality is they're only lethal if you allow them to be lethal, if you apologize. And the lesson was to defeat these guys is never apologize to the left. And the Democrats don't apologize. And if you look at how Trump handled that situation compared to John McCain or Mitt Romney, that's what really sank them, was trying to have honor based on the left's definition of honor. And so, but nobody wants to see this. And I'm just tired of this lie and this myth that Trump is such a terrible, unpresidential figure when the left is nothing close to that. I mean, what they're doing makes Donald Trump look like Mother Teresa.
It does. And look, this thing's all going to play itself out over the next couple of weeks. Initially, they thought he was going to be indicted today. Now they're moving it back to next week. I got to tell you something. If someone in the Biden administration had half a brain, they'd get some staffer on the phone with that DA in New York and say, get out of this. Somehow get out of this. We don't want to see this. But I doubt that type of phone call will take place. Biden seems to be trying to distance himself from this. At the end of the day, Drew, people around the globe, we talked about Banana Republic earlier in the show, they're going to look at the United States and go, wait a minute. A former president indicted on a misdemeanor that happened 7 or 8 years ago. And frankly, in most parts of the globe, it's not a crime to do what he did. And again, the whole thing it's bad. And I would hope someone in the Biden administration would have an ounce of common sense, reach out to that DA and say, stop this. But I don't think that's going to happen. So here we are. I don't know. It's very, very, very troubling. Very, very troubling. Let me move on to a couple other things. One more international thing, and I want to get back to some economic news. I know a lot of people in the U.S. may not care about it too much, but that was a big deal in France when they raised the retirement age from 62 to 64. People were up in the street. I mean, they raised hell. They tried to have a no confidence vote of the government. The reason I bring it up, Drew, That's a prelude to what's going to happen in this country sooner or later. Because when it comes to Social Security, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to have to raise the retirement age, or they're going to have to take more money out of people's paychecks to support that system. You know they're not going to cut benefits. So that's why I bring it up. You know, I know the people in Europe want to retire early. They always want it's a different mindset. But Drew, eventually that problem is going to come here too.
Yeah, well, it is here in many ways. We're just pretending that it's not here.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I think the latest estimates, they might have moved it to 9 years, but let's just say it's 10, between 9 and 11 years. It's going to be insolvent. And like you said, the options are going to be to cut benefits by 23%, something around there. Or, yeah, they're going to have to raise taxes or raise the retirement age. And what really bothers me is that this is really not a partisan discussion. This is about retirees. This is about what's good for the country. And it's so annoying and irritating and just disgusting to me and disturbing to see the left come out and play politics with this all day long. They accuse the Republicans who actually want to fix this and shore it up so that it actually exists for people. They accuse them of trying to kill and take away benefits from old people when they're actually, by doing nothing and proposing nothing, are the ones who are actually threatening the entire system itself. Now, I mean, as a young person that's, 36, Social Security just needs to go. We need to pay out fairly people who've paid in. I don't care what I've paid in. There are ways the government could make this fair and make this right with people. People that are millionaires would probably be okay not to have Social Security, okay? But you could make adjustments on capital gains tax or whatever so everyone gets treated correctly. But this is a Ponzi scheme, and it's so stupid. Especially in economic times like this for young people, the idea that I have to part with roughly 6% of my paycheck or whatever every time to go into some fund that you tell me you're going to hold for me and give back to me in 40 years. So I can be trusted to work my whole life, but I can't be trusted, to save for my own retirement. It's so stupid. It's not invested. The benefits are going down every year. And it's sick. It's absolutely sick. And the best thing is get rid of it or privatize it or whatever. But of course, I hate old people. No, I don't. I'm sick of the Party of Progress has all these systems and welfare benefits in place that are not solving any problems. They're making things worse. They're eating up the entire budget. But the Party of Progress can't acknowledge that something doesn't work and fix it. Yeah, give me a break.
It is going to have to be addressed. There is no question about it. Economically, Drew, a lot of stuff happening, and the stock market's rebounded a little bit, but particularly out in your neck of the woods, there's been a lot of issues out there. Amazon decides they're going to lay off another 9,000 people. Great. Okay, technology companies, Alphabet's announced layoffs. Facebook, Meta has announced layoffs. A lot of tech companies are doing that. And then you had the Silicon Valley Bank fiasco, which has led to some severe issues within the banking system. Drew, what's the feeling in the Bay Area in Northern California? Because that seems to be the epicenter of where some of these issues are. You got Republic Bank out there. The stock's down 50% yesterday. It's up 25% today on hopes Jamie Dimon can come up with a rescue plan for it. UBS buys Credit Suisse for $3.2 billion. $17 billion of debt gets wiped out. Okay, it was painful. What's the general feeling? You're not too far from Silicon Valley about what's happening up in Northern California.
Well, the people out here have sticks so far up there, what's that they can't figure out, what's up from down and so on and so forth. So they can't possibly comprehend what's going on. They just want their money and it's unfair and they're victims. But, there's some concern. I think people are living in la la land a little bit. They don't want to confront the actual severity of what's going on. They don't want to address the Fed's involvement in this. They don't want to address any of the root causes of this to begin with. And it's unfortunate. People don't seem to want to take this as an opportunity to learn about how the market works and, what the real culprits are and how to right this. I mean, people just think that money's just going to exist and come out of nowhere forever and bail them out all day. And really, that is the message that the Biden administration gave. They can lie and massage the language all day long and say this wasn't a bailout, but it was a bailout. The money's going to eventually come from the taxpayer, even if they raise rates on banks to pay for the the 251,000 plus dollars that weren't insured. I mean, it's going to get passed on to the taxpayer. And, you know, I just don't see any lessons being learned from this. I mean, you can't keep interest rates at zero and expect for there not to be a problem down the road. And more importantly, I mean, you can talk about SVB and the woke stuff. That's relevant, but that's really not what caused this at the end. What caused this, firstly, was the run on the bank. And the reality is, it's almost like people don't even know how banks work anymore. I mean, banks don't have the money. You deposit your money, and then the way the banks make money, so forth. That's how banks work.
Right.
And if we all ran on the bank, Mark, tomorrow, today, guess what? Every bank would go under.
Every bank would go under. That's exactly right. Things have stabilized a little bit. I've talked about it last week. What I want to know the answer to is why the San Francisco Federal Reserve, which was charged, with oversight of SVB and now to a degree Republic, what happened there? I mean, those questions have to be answered because we're entrusting the Federal Reserve with our monetary policy. They're likely, according to markets, about 80% chance to raise interest rates 25 basis points tomorrow. But we really need to understand, in my opinion, how did the regulators miss this? I mean, all the warning signs were there. Of course, everything becomes clear after the fact. But when you see, this is simple stuff. I mean, if you load up on bonds at 0 to 1% and rates go to 4 to 5, that's Econ 101, folks. You are going to take losses. So I don't know. I've got a concern about that. I do think that some of the systemic risk is still there, but I gave the Biden administration some credit. I think they made the right choice among a lot of bad choices. Had they not guaranteed those deposits over 250, I think there was a danger of significant contagion. Yeah, now did some rich people get bailed out? Yeah, what was their crime? Depositing money in a bank. The good news is, Drew, good news if you can speak rhetorically, the shareholders and the bondholders were the ones that took the significant losses. In Europe, the bondholders took the losses at Credit Suisse. So again, you're right about taxpayers may eventually pay higher fees, but in actuality, if this is the end of it, and again, I'm not of the belief that may be the end. Generally, it's the cockroach theory. When you see a couple of them, there's more. We won't know that until it happens. But I did give them some credit because I thought, okay, they made the right choice among a lot of bad choices. But I still want to know where those regulators were because, in my view, that's where the problem originated from. But my sense is, I think you're right. You're closer to Silicon Valley, obviously, than I am here, being in Florida and Southern California. But there's going to have to be some changes so that we don't have this situation happen again. Let me talk about a couple other things. And this is going to hit Americans, Drew. Home sales went up in February, like a little over 14%. But prices declined for the first time in 10 years. Again, you're near an epicenter of very high prices. This is going to affect the American people because if they keep raising these rates, mortgages, the average person, it's going to be tough for them to get into homes.
Well, it is. I mean, now I just have to go back a little bit because you were talking about the bank situation. One of the things that the so-called regulators and Fed somehow never knew, even though that you knew it and I knew it, is that, when you raise interest rates like that, you have a negative impact on the value of the treasuries and so on and so forth that the banks possess. And nobody somehow understood that. I mean, you're raising interest rates. Okay, fine. We've talked about it on your show before, to deal with recession and so on and so forth, to combat inflation. Okay. And you usually get a recession as a result. But the other impact is that you have what happened to the banks happen. And so, I mean, these guys have to put the brakes on now. They don't have a choice. They can't continue to say we're going to raise it by this much and that much. I mean, they've got to stop. That's the message, I think, from what happened here. You have to put the brakes on this immediately. And, I don't see any good economic news out there personally. I don't know that, I mean, the median house price has come down. Okay. I mean, you've got the interest rates to deal with. I don't know how that correlates over to, people can suddenly buy homes and so on and so forth. I don't know that it's good that, I can't sell my house for as much as I could have, last year.
Right.
So it's just, and that's the thing. I think everything's so muddied with the fact that much of this, yes, it's a result of some monetary policy, but it's also a consequence of unprecedented shutdown.
Yeah.
Nobody can comprehend the ripple effect still of that. I mean, it's just you're like you shut down an economy and you've got all these things in place that we're supposed to deal with a market that was never shut down.
Right.
So, okay, let's invent the wheel. I don't know.
Well, we are definitely going to go through some murky times here, but my best advice to everyone out there, pay close attention to what's happening. I mean, don't just think, you throw money in a bank, it's there forever. As you correctly said, banks don't keep money, they invest it. But as long time in America, people believe banks are safe. And the federal government, Federal Reserve, they have to ensure that that continues. We only got a couple minutes left, Drew. I want to talk about two things. One, which I call the court of stupidity. I mean, when I look through the news and I see things, I don't know, okay, this is politically on the left, politically on the right. I saw the court of stupidity the other day, and I don't know if you've heard about this, but a Philadelphia judge, get a load of this. Remember when all the George Floyd crap was going on and people were out there throwing rocks at police and rioting and creating public mayhem? Well, in Philadelphia, the police stepped in, used tear gas, they broke it up. But in this country, no, that's not how the left sees it. A liberal judge actually awarded a little over $9 million to 343 plaintiffs, which after you knock out a third for attorney's fees, about 19 grand a protester. Drew, not bad work if you can get it. I mean, when I saw this, I'm like, what part of insanity is going on in some of these deep blue cities? I mean, this is absolutely nuts. And yet, here it is. It's happening.
Well, look, I think that one way to explain the seemingly inexplicable decision of supporting criminals over victims is Stalin did this in Russia. He put the criminals on the street to stoke fear and to create chaos. And that's much of what's going on. You've seen Soros's hand, right? We talk about the Manhattan DA, Soros backed. He spent, I think, $40 million or something like that, but they've been elected all over the country. And all of them have the same thing in common, right? Soft on crime, no bail policies, putting criminals on the street. And Americans are less safe because of it. And I don't know how much more of this we can tolerate. And simultaneously, while they do this and make you and I and everyone else who's law abiding less safe, they also want to take away our guns.
Yeah, no, it's a strange, very strange time. Attacking law-abiding citizens and rewarding criminals. Crazy, upside down. About a minute left. I want to close it out with this. New polling. Now, again, we don't want to put too much into polling, but Drew, one thing is consistent. Trump's maintaining a very healthy lead as an announced candidate versus Ron DeSantis, who is not announced. Morning Consult, pretty respected polling group. Trump's up 54-26. Indictment or no indictment, that's a healthy lead. How do you make things out in the race with the polling right now? Pence and Haley are single digits.
Yeah, they're not going to gain either. The only people who like Nikki Haley live in South Carolina. The only people who like Mike Pence live in Indiana. So that's it. They might get 2 states. But no, I mean, that's look, it's not surprising to me, really. A lot can happen between now and a year from now. But I just think that people looking in don't understand the bond that Trump still has with his voters. And I think that DeSantis, he's been a great governor for Florida. He hasn't been able to step up and differentiate himself as a kind of national political candidate, right, in a presidential race yet. And I think he hurt himself with his response or lack of response or weak response to the looming Trump indictment. And again, like I told you before the show, I'm fair-minded. I understand he's been attacked, and people don't like it. It turns people off. But if you want to be a leader, you got to put personal differences aside. And for him to kind of dismiss what's happening is insignificant compared to what he needs to do in Florida as a governor. Maybe he doesn't want to run. Maybe he's not going to announce, but that's one way to make sure it's nobody wants you.
Well, as someone who spent the better part of the last 3 months down there and literally witnessed, there's 800 people a day moving into the state, and they're not coming down there just because it's, quote, sunny weather. There's a lot of good things happening in Florida, and a lot of the issues plaguing the rest of the country, frankly, are not plaguing Florida, which is why 800 to 1,000 people are moving in. I think he will announce sometime, I think, May or even June, because there's still plenty of time. And I really think the race is going to tighten up. My personal feeling is I want to see a competitive Republican primary. I do not want to see what happened in 2016. If Trump's our nominee, I'm going to support him, but I do want to see a robust debate with former President Trump and Ron DeSantis may get in, a Mike Pompeo, a Tim Scott. We need a rigorous debate on our side, because on the Democratic side, you already know what's going to happen. It's going to be a Joe Biden snooze fest, Rose Garden strategy. And, that's what we're going to be up against. Drew, we covered a lot. We got a lot more we could talk about, but we're sort of out of time. So happy to have you back. Love the backdrop. Love seeing you again. And best of luck with everything you have going on in Northern Cal, fighting off the liberals. And we'll do the same down here from Southern Cal.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. We'll be back on Thursday. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening. We will always cut through the propaganda, and we'll give it to you straight. See you on Thursday.